Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. Today we're going to be talking about resins and epoxies. Now I know a lot of woodworkers out there are anathema to anything a resin or epoxy. It's just horrible for woodworking. Well, I really want to go through this and show a bunch of different uses and how they can be applied and which epoxies get used in which situations. And hopefully I can clear this up a little bit and answer some questions. So let's dive into this sticky situation. So first off, today we're going to be looking at a lot of different epoxies here, and this is really only scratching the surface of different variabilities and different types out there, and I'm not going to be able to cover everything about epoxies in here. I'm just going to take you through what I commonly use and what are going to be commonly used in a wood shop. I'm going to try and leave links to all of the epoxies that I use down in the description below, so if you see something you like, hop on down there and take a look at it. Now, first off, I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of a disclaimer here. I am not an epoxy expert. There are people out there who devote their lives to this, and even then, there are so many different variations and different capabilities and different mixtures that sometimes that can be, well, a lot of information. So today we're just going to be kind of narrowing it down to the things that I normally use in the shop. So we're going to talk about the particular product, how it's used, different ins and outs of it, where it's good, where it's not, and all of that information. So let's dive in and start going through these. So first, let's talk about your simple 5-minute epoxy. You'll find this in any big box store, and these ones are really great for when you just need a little bit of epoxy. You just need to connect two pieces together. And this is easy because it's one plunger that pushes out both part A and part B in equal amounts. So you can squeeze it out, grab a toothpick or a popsicle stick and mix it up quickly. If ever I have a piece splinter off and I want to reconnect it, this is probably what I'm going to be grabbing. It's just 5 minutes, so I can clamp it in place. 5 minutes later, come back and continue working. The other nice thing about these is you can get them in just about any time ratio, 10 minute, 25 minute, 30 minute, an hour. You can get them in super clear, you can get them flexible, and so if you have something that, you know, you're working with plastic or something that just needs a little bit more holding power or needs to be a little more flexible, you can get these in just about any type or ratio you want. And I probably have 4 or 5 different types, but the most common ones I use are just the simple, clear 5-minute epoxy. Then there's the next step up. When you need something a little bit more, you need a holding power, you need, basically an actual glue rather than just a quick fix. That's where I like to get this DevCon home. This is a very quick epoxy. You just mix in equal parts. You just have to make sure you put a little bit of this and a little bit of this. Don't worry about being exact. Just make a pile on this one and make a pile of this one that's about the same size. Mix them together with a toothpick or a popsicle stick and you're good to go. Now normally when I'm mixing these, I'm going to put out a piece of tape on the bench and I'll squirt those onto the tape and I'll mix them up on the tape. That way when I'm done, I just peel up the tape and throw it away. And it's a very quick and easy way to mix up just a little bit. And these particular bottles will usually last a year or two, and very rarely do I ever go through an entire bottle, but it's like 10 bucks total. They're relatively cheap and it's good stuff. Next, we're going to start getting into some other epoxies that are a little bit different. And you'll see I have quite a bit from Total Boat. They have a huge variety of epoxies, and about half of the epoxies I have on hand come from Total Boat because they are, well, they're one of the best epoxy makers out there. They make all different kinds for all different purposes, and the ones I'm showing you here are just the scratch of the surface. This one I like because it is very quick and it's very easy. If ever I have a large structural connection to make, this is what I'm going to grab. Now the nice thing about this, it is a very thick epoxy, very strong epoxy, and this is designed for boat timbers, things that are going to be in the salt water. They're going to be in a moist environment. They're going to be needing to be structural. This is what you want for it. The other nice thing about this is it's very thick. It has a good gap filling capability to it, so if the joints aren't perfectly perfect, this will hold up. And the nice thing about this is it's actually a caulk tube. There's 2 different chambers in here with part A and part B. And when you push this, it pushes out equal amounts through this tip. And you can screw on an applicator tip here that will actually mix them together. So you don't have to be mixing it on the floor. You just put this in here and you pump it out to where you want it, just like in a caulk gun. Now these tips are only one use, so you're going to need to get a bag of them. But these, once you put the cap back on, they will stay for a long time. In woodworking, I've only had a couple opportunities to use this one, but if ever I'm doing a large outdoor joinery item, this is what I'm going to be grabbing. It fills gaps, it goes in large spaces, it pumps out quick and easy. It's just a great glue to have on hand. I want to talk about these next two together. We have the West System Epoxy and we have Total Boat High Performance. These are your structural glues. These are the glues that are incredibly powerful. If you want to put two joints together and never pull them apart, this is what you use. These are so structural that back when I was building a 4-seat airplane, we were building a 4-seat, 200-mile-an-hour airplane out of fiberglass and resin. We used West System Epoxy because this is the tried and true, this is an incredibly strong epoxy with known parameters. It has this much strength, and it is very, very good for anytime you have a structural member, anything you're going to be trusting your life to. These structural epoxies are what you want. West System is the more tried and true older method, and so a lot of people really trust it because it's known. The Total Boat is a little bit newer, and so it's a little less known, but a lot of the tests that I've seen and the information on it showing that this is actually a little bit stronger, a little bit powerful, a little bit longer lasting, and a little bit better glue. Now, for the woodworker, you're generally not going to use this. I know a lot of woodworkers who will get one set of one or the other, and it will last them for 5-10 years. They will sit there and work for a long, long time. The pumps wear out before the epoxy itself goes bad. And with the West Systems as well, they also have their own pumps. I haven't opened up these yet because I'm almost out of my West System, and as soon as I'm done with that, then I'm going to put my pumps into the Total Boat and be experimenting with that more. But for most woodworkers, one of these two sets will last you for just about ever. Now, one of the things with the West System, the 105 resin, you then mix in a hardener. So one pump of this equals one pump of this. And the hardener then comes with two different variants. There's a slow hardener and a fast hardener. And so with the slow hardener, you have about a couple hours until it sets. With the slow hardener, you come back 24 hours later and that is set. And then you can kind of mix and match. So if you put two pumps of the resin in, you can put one pump of the slow and one pump of the hard. And you can get a speed that's halfway in between the two. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility with that. The only downside is if you are going to be mixing in color, you have to know that the hardeners have a slightly different tint to them. So the fast hardener is actually a little bit more yellow, whereas the slow hardener is a little more clear. So if you're mixing in a blue pigment and you use the fast hardener, you're probably going to end up with a green tint, which actually provides a really nice aquamarine. These give you a lot of flexibility, and so anytime you're doing something with a structural member and you need a glue, particularly if it's going to be outside, these are the ones to use. Okay, now let's talk about something a little bit different. These are penetrating epoxies. They are a little bit slower epoxy. They are very, very watery in comparison. And what these intend to do is they tend to soak into the wood. Most epoxies are just going to sit on the surface or just get into the top few fibers. These will actually get down into the wood, and in some cases will get down about an 1/8 inch or more, so they can stabilize the outside surface. So if you ever have a punky wood that has some soft parts on it and you want to keep this wood, it looks cool, but anytime you bump into it, you're going to be dinging it. Put a coat of penetrating epoxy on there and it will soak down into those fibers and stabilize them from the outside. And so a lot of times if I'm working outdoors, if I'm making an outdoor table, I'm going to coat the entire table in penetrating epoxy and seal the outside. That way water can't get down into it. And then I can put a varnish or a lacquer on top of that to give my finish. A penetrating epoxy is a great way to stabilize punky wood or to seal wood so that absolutely no water can get in. Now, with every epoxy I've talked about so far, there is an amount that you can pour it. If you pour it any thicker than that, then you're going to overheat the epoxy and you get a runaway process, because most of the epoxies will cure faster when they get hotter. And the faster they cure, the hotter they get, because there's an exothermic reaction. So they're going to be getting hotter and they're going to cure faster and they're going to get hotter, and eventually you get a runaway where they boil up and they basically ruins the epoxy for a structural purpose. So most of those are glues. They're intended for connecting two pieces together or sealing a surface. They're not intended for pouring a thickness. But if you ever want to do a river table or pour a void, or you have a large gap you want to fill, something larger than an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch, you're going to want a thicker setting epoxy. The dining room table that I did a year or so ago, I used this Epoxy, and this stuff is fantastic. You can pour this 3 inches thick or more. It is incredibly clear. It pours like water. It will work into any pour, which means you have to tape things off perfectly with this. The only downside is it takes 3 days for this to get hard, and in some cases I'm not going to even touch it for 4 days. So you've got to make sure that you're going to set something aside and leave it for a long time. But this will give you a crystal clear. It is the clearest epoxy I've ever come across. And it fills into any gap and any hole. This is an incredible epoxy because you can just whip it up. You don't have to vacuum it. The bubbles just float right out because it's so thin. For the desk I'm working on right now, I'm actually using the Total Boat system, and this is their thick set. This is very, very similar. It's a little bit thicker than this, but that means that it's going to cure faster. This will cure in 2 days, so you don't have to worry about it working on it. I can actually come back and use a plane on it in 2 days. I can mix this up, dump it in. Now I am going to have a little more trouble with bubbles in this, and that's why I'm actually vacuuming it out. I can suck the bubbles out, so when I pour it in, it's crystal clear. And this will give you an incredibly clear surface. So if you're worried about time, go with the Total Boat system because it does pour really, really clear. Both of these then mix with tinting very well. You can actually mix in dyes and tints to bring up a particular color. So if you want to look into a clear surface and you want to see strata of different color, you can mix colors into these, and they're a lot of fun to play with. Next up we have our bar top epoxy, or in this case they call it the tabletop. This is another one from Total Boat, and there's several other companies out there that make it. Now this is when you want that film finish on top of the wood. If you've ever been to a bar and they have a wooden bar, there's like an 1/8 inch of plastic sitting on top. That's what these are. You level out the top so it's perfectly level, and you'll get an incredibly smooth, clear surface that protects the wood. And this is like the ultimate wood protection. It is not going to allow you to touch the wood. You're not going to spill anything on it. If you dump water or other things onto the bar top, it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to stain it. It's not going to reach the wood. This is total protection. So if you want that ultra high gloss, thick buildup on top, this is what you want. It's a little bit pricey, but it does provide that really thick surface that some people really like. Now next I want to talk about Cactus Juice. Now this isn't an epoxy, but it is still a resin, but it doesn't need a hardener to harden up. You don't need a second part by itself. This is activated by heat. And one of the interesting things about that is you can use this. It is very, very watery. It is very, very thin. And you can vacuum it into a piece of wood. And this will allow you to then stabilize it. With the other epoxies, they're too thick to vacuum into the wood. They don't work down into the pores. This will get deep, 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 deep into the wood. This will suck 3 and 4 inches down into the wood if you vacuum it down in. And then the cool thing about that is you can stick it in the oven, heat it up to over 200 degrees, and it will then cure and harden up. So you don't have to have a second part. You just let this go in, and you're good to go. And then there's any excess that drips off, you pour it back in here, and as long as it doesn't get up to 200 degrees, you can store this almost indefinitely. There are a bunch of other resins out there that will cure at different temperatures or different thicknesses, some of them that cure in UV light, and other things like that I don't use that much. But for stabilization, particularly for turning, this is used all the time. And I have an entire video going into stabilization. So if you have a piece of wood that's punky or it's not quite as solid as you would like, this is the answer to it, because this will penetrate all the way into the center of the wood and harden it up. Lastly, I want to talk about some of the extra things. These are dyes and pigments. It's always good to have a bunch of popsicle sticks on hand. I use these for mixing up. Just grab some masking tape, put it on the bench, and then use the stick to mix it up. That's great for epoxies. Then we have our pigments and dyes. So these ones are from Epoxy. They work great with the Epoxy I was using earlier. They come in a wide variety of colors. And you have to be very, very careful with how much of this. It just takes like 1 drop of dye into a quart or more of epoxy to change the color completely. If you put in 2 or 3 drops, you may end up with something that's opaque. You can't see into it. But just 1 drop and you might be able to still see through it. Trans tint is great if you're trying to match the color of a stain or a wood grain. This particular one is Dark Mission, and I use this a lot if I'm filling voids and I want all those little cracks and crevices and bug holes. This is a great look. I like the color on this. 1 drop will do a lot, and I've had this bottle for 4 or 5 years and I've barely even touched it. I think I've only used like 20 or 30 drops out of the levels still like way up here. The other ones I use are these powder mixes, and I bought a set of them on eBay a while ago, and they come with all these different colors. And I like these because they're kind of speckly. If ever I want to add a little bit of color or texture to the surface, these are what I'll mix in there. And they come in every different color, and silvers and golds, and just the clear white speckle. I love mixing these in. They can do some amazing things. So usually when mixing these in, I'm going to mix up the epoxy and I'm going to mix it thoroughly. Then I'm going to put my dye in, and that gives me a chance to mix it again and make sure that it is completely homogeneous. This way I know that I'm not mixing just until the dye looks good. I'm mixing it completely, because the most important thing with epoxy is to mix it all the way. I know that I am just barely scratching the surface of epoxies and resins. These are just the ones that I commonly use in the shop. Do you need all of these? No. If you have a structural glue epoxy, that is all you really need. The West System or the Total Boat High Performance are going to run you about $100 for a set, but it is something that is going to last you for years and years and years to come. So a lot of people really kind of consider this an investment. If you're going to be doing anything with external use, this is the way to go. And then all the others are project specific. Do you have something that's punky? Then you need to dump in some penetrating epoxy. Do you have something where you want to do a large thick pour? Then you're going to need a thick set epoxy. And then, of course, colors. Anytime you want to do something fun, there's lots of little ways to do into it. So you really don't need all of this. I just have most of it because, well, I have to teach it all. I'm just hoping today I can take a little bit of the confusion out of the system so that we can answer a few questions. Now, I'm sure there are lots more questions out there. Go ahead and throw those in the comments below. I would love to hear those, and I'll try and get to as many of them as I possibly can. So I think that will about do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. If you do have any other thoughts or ideas, concerns, snide remarks, let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, have a wonderful day. Whatever you do, use really good tape. Otherwise, you're gonna get an epoxy floor. Yep, this is what I would call a sticky situation.